Ugly alien girl live in a garbage and ate from the garbage then? She met with human and changed everything. Asterisk the first time Dr. Adrienne Rick saw her. She was crouched behind a thermal exhaust vent, face caked with soot, hair tangled with wire clippings, and her fingers halfway into a recycling chute as she pulled out something barely edible. Her skin was a patchwork of scales and ash, scarred and cracked like someone had tried to peel her from herself, and only half finished the job. Her clothes were not clothes. They were a bundled patchwork of tarp fragments, wire mesh, and insulation. Foam tied around her limbs with fusion string. The stench of decay rose from her like an aura not of rot, but of long, unwashed survival. She moved like a hunted animal, sharp jerks, low crouches, eyes never still. The streets of Varkas Prime had long forgotten her, and the people did their best to erase her from their sight before memory had a chance to form. They called her many things. Scav, Trashern, Gutter Spawn, but none used her name because none believed she had one. She growled at children who dared point at her, snapped at patrol drones that tried to chase her off the steam vents, and when cornered by street cleaners, she bit through a man's wrist before vanishing into the maze of neon-lit gutters and underwalk tunnels. No one knew where she slept. She was legend in the worst sense a living ghost of failed genetic programs, of abandoned biocast experiments, of one more piece of organic garbage that kept crawling back from the brink. No matter how often the city tried to forget her, Adrienne had been sent to Varos Prime as part of the Interstellar Reconstruction Corps, a Terran-funded medical outreach designed to stabilize the collapsing rim colonies. The streets he walked daily were overrun with sickness, mutation, and neglect. And yet no patient unsettled his team more than the glimpses they caught of the ragged girl with the savage eyes and blood-smeared hands. Most assumed she was dangerous, feral, beyond reason. He had only ever seen her once from afar.
Ald!
Until that day under the scaffolding, behind the Southern Fusion well, when he stepped out with a portable diagnostic scanner in one hand and to protein bars in the other. She froze the moment she saw him, crouched low to the metal as if preparing to lunge. Her teeth were visible to cracked 3-filed down 2 blunt nubs, a broken smile, half a snarl. But her eyes were not animal. They were wide, weary, and old. Too old for someone who looked no more than 14 standard years, he said. Nothing, just knelt slowly, placing the food on the ground in front of him, then easing back without a word. She didn't blink. She didn't move. For 5 full minutes, they simply stared at each other. One man crouched in medic fatigues, the other a breathing wound wrapped in trash. And then she snatched the food and vanished between the wall vents. Would have ended there, just another glimpse of what the city wanted buried. If she hadn't come back the next night, and the next, each time she stayed a little longer. She never spoke, never ate in front of him, never got closer than 6 meters. But she came. And Adrienne, for reasons he couldn't explain, kept showing up with food in silence. In time, he began to understand what she really feared. Being looked at. It's not seen, not noticed, but looked at as if existence alone was a crime. She wore her filth. Like armor, wrapped herself in decay, not because she loved it, but because it guaranteed distance, and everyone, including the medics, were happy to give her that. Everyone but him. The infection was obvious the moment she limped into the open square. Adrian was restocking his medical crates at the market edge when he saw her emerge from between 2 metal refuse stacks. She was dragging her left foot, her jaw clenched tight, her lower leg twice its normal size, with angry, throbbing discoloration creeping from ankle to knee. She tried to hide it beneath her makeshift wrappings, but every step drew a winch she couldn't mask. Bystanders parted like oil from water. Some muttered curses, others just turned away. Her presence alone disrupted the order, as if the scent of suffering made people itch. She tried to cross the square without looking at anyone, head down, eyes hooded, but then her foot caught a rusted pipe and she went down hard, face first into the pavement. No one moved. Adrian did. He was across the square in seconds, kneeling. Beside her, his medkit already open. She scrambled backward on her elbows, hissing through her teeth, blood running from her mouth. Don't, she growled, voice cracked and raw. Get off. He didn't touch her. Stayed low, hands open, gaze steady. You need help, he said. You're infected. That leg's not going to hold much longer. She spat at the ground between them. I don't need you. I ain't dying. Believe you, Adrian said, and reached slowly into his pack. But I think your body's trying to disagree. She watched him with narrowed eyes, trembling from fever and pain. And when he pulled out a vial of neutralizer, she stopped moving. Just watched, just breathed. I'll leave it here, he said, setting the injector down between them. You can take it or not. I'll be at the West Fountain if you change your mind. He left without another word. 10 minutes later, he felt a presence behind him and turned to find her standing there swaying, crutching herself forward with a pipe she must have stolen from a vent shaft. She didn't speak, just held out the empty vial with blood on her fingers. He took it gently, name, he asked. She sneered. They call me a mistake. What do you call you? She hesitated for the first time. Vera. All right, Vera, he said. Let's keep that leg. He spent the next 2 hours cleaning the wound, scraping out infected tissue, and injecting slow-release antibiotics into the deep muscle. She never screamed, never cried, just stared at the ceiling of the open cargo shelter and clenched her fists every time the pain flared. When it was over, she sat up slowly, pulled his field jacket off the chair beside him, and draped it over her shoulders like it had always been hers. You're not like the others, she said finally. I'm not, he agreed. She gave a dry laugh that sounded more like a cough. You're dumber, he grinned. Probably. And for the first time, she smiled without baring her teeth. The days that followed were not clean, and they were far from easy. Vera didn't become tame, didn't fold into some docile patient grateful for a warm bed and clean bandages. She was still wild, sharp, and unpredictable, but she returned. That alone was enough to unsettle the staff. The other medics whispered warnings. In the break room of Sector 6's clinic station, she's not a real patient. She'll steal the dermapins, lock the serums when she's near. A few had already tried to run her off again when Adrian wasn't present, citing camp regulations and risk profiles, but she'd fought back with claws and teeth and disappeared before anyone could justify punishment. Adrian, however, saw through the fire. She wasn't attacking because she was dangerous. She was attacking because danger was the only language the galaxy had ever spoken to her. He spent hours patching up both her wounds and the ones she inflicted in defense. Each session, a silent truce. Slowly, Vera began to accept the tent as neutral ground, though she still refused to sleep on a cot, choosing instead the dark corner under the supply shelf where the hum of machinery muffled her nightmares. Adrian never challenged her. Instead, he slid nutrient bars beneath the shelf, left cleaned gloves folded nearby. I kept a datapad charged for her to draw on when the nights grew long and the ghosts returned. Outside, a doll continued to reject her. Vendors shouted at her if she wandered too close. Civilians crossed the street or locked their doors. Children mocked her from balconies, calling her names Adrian refused to repeat. One evening, he found her sitting alone on the edge of a scaffolding, beams 6 stories above the clinic, staring out into the chemical-lit fog of Varkas Prime's skyline. He joined her in silence, careful not to spook her. They call me Garbage Ghost now, she said without looking at him. Is that what you are? He asked. She shook her head. I'm what they threw away and what didn't die. He leaned back against the steel and said gently, Good. That makes you more dangerous than all of them. She didn't speak for a while, then said in a whisper, Sometimes I hate how much I want them to be wrong. That night, Adrian left the clinic door open and set 2 bowls on the table. One for himself, one for whoever decided to eat, and she came. She didn't eat with her hands anymore. She used a fork awkwardly, like it was a language she hadn't spoken in years. The attack came without warning. A mercenary team contracted by an outer ring syndicate stormed the clinic compound in search of stolen medical supplies, claiming illegal distribution and smuggling. They weren't wrong. Black market traders often slipped inside, disguised as patients. But this time, the syndicate used the excuse to justify a public show of force. They came with guns, drones, and permission from someone far above Adrienne's pay grade. The first blast took out the south gate. Patients screamed. Crates exploded. Syringes and plasma packs spilled across the floor like metallic blood. Adrienne ducked under an overturned stretcher and dragged a crying mother and child toward the surgical wing. But everywhere around him was chaos. Blinding flashes, the smell of ozone, the whine of rail shots ricocheting off metal beams. And then came the scream. Not from the patients, not from the staff. It was raw, low, animal, throat-tripping cry of war. Vera burst from the east entrance, clad in nothing but rags, wrapped in Adrienne's old jacket like a cape, swinging a broken rebar pole with all the fury of a detonated star. She lunged into the nearest merc, ducked under his plasma rifle, and jammed the pole into the soft coil of wiring beneath his neck guard. He went down gurgling. She pivoted without pause to tackle another who had just grabbed a wounded elder. Adrienne watched in disbelief as she moved, not just with rage, but with precision. This wasn't wild fury. This was practiced, honed, weaponized survival. She knew how to move through chaos. She was born in it. By the time Adrienne reached her, she was kneeling beside a trembling girl, shielding her with her body as a merc leveled a rifle. Adrienne didn't think. Heechard tackled the gunman and fired a trank into the side of the man's neck. When it was over, the entire clinic was in ruins. The mercs had been either repelled or arrested by returning local enforcers too late. To matter, Vera had taken a burn along her left shoulder, skin charred black and blistered. She didn't cry, didn't ask for help. She only looked at Adrienne and whispered, "Didn't want them to take your people." Adrienne knelt beside her, touched her hair and whispered, "You are my people." She stared at him, eyes wide, then looked down at her hands as if unsure what they had just done. That night, she stayed in the clinic bed, not under the shelf, not in hiding, on a real bed. And when Adrienne came to check on her, she was asleep, her body curled up in the field jacket, her burnt arm bandaged in his best dermal mesh, and her free hand resting on a crumpled drawing pad. On it, she had sketched 2 stick figures standing. Under a cracked roof, one tall, one small. Both were smiling. The clinic smelled of smoke for days. Burned plastic, fried circuits, scorched medicine cabinets. It lingered in the walls like the ghost of war. But within the destruction, something had changed. The patients, especially the children, began peeking out from the corners, whispering about the girl with fire in her hands. Some called her the Wraith Medic. Others just said the one who fought. For us, none called her Garbage Ghost anymore. Vera didn't notice. Maybe she pretended not to. She still limped on her wounded side, still dressed in rags, still never accepted shoes, even when Adrienne offered boots reinforced with cooling mesh. But the moment the clinic reopened its main hallway, she took it upon herself to guard it. No one asked her. No one assigned her a post. But every evening, she stood beside the broken scanning console at the entrance, with her bent rebar pole tucked over one shoulder. Watching strangers with a gaze that could strip flesh, Adrienne had long since given up trying to define her role. She wasn't staff, wasn't a registered volunteer, wasn't officially anything, but she was there. When he performed surgeries late into the night, she brought him water without asking. When frightened patients cried, she handed them torn sketch pages from her pad pictures of monsters being punched, of brave doctors in flowing coats, stars holding hands with shadows. Adrienne kept every one she gave him, not out of sentiment, but because each one felt like watching an impossible flower push through concrete. She rarely talked to others, but when she did, her words landed like gunfire, short, blunt, direct. She told one merchant to stop overcharging refugees or I'll melt your teeth and sell the alloy. He laughed until she slammed a power cell against his cart and walked away. With his cooling packs for a boy with blood poisoning, ADRIE inspected, fallout. Instead, the merchant came back the next day with double the supplies and left them on the steps. No note, just shame. One afternoon, Vera returned to the clinic with blood on her knuckles and a small, trembling creature in her arms. It was a frailing pup, barely alive, skin split from electric burns, chest heaving in erratic spasms. They were kicking it for sport, she said as Adrian took the limp thing from her arms and placed it on the exam table. They laughed when it screamed. Adrian worked fast. Vera watched every move, her fists clenched so tight her fingers bled. The pup survived barely, but it opened its eyes and tried to lick her palm with a shaking tongue. She didn't flinch. Just sat beside it for hours afterward, until the lights dimmed and the stars returned outside the clinic dome. She named it Cinder. Cinder followed her everywhere after that. Its broken legs replaced with repulsor braces, Adrian customized himself in the dead of night. It limped and buzzed and barked and glowed like a tiny furnace. Wherever Vera went, it went. When she growled at soldiers, Cinder growled louder. When she slept beneath the cot instead of on it, Cinder curled into the folds of her coat, like it had always belonged there. People began to wave at her carefully, respectfully, as if they finally understood what Adrian had known since the day she first snarled at him from behind a vending unit. She wasn't broken, she was burned. And from the ashes she'd begun to remake herself, rag by rag, scar by scar. The storm began with a newsfeed glitch. An independent drone from a Terran journalist collective had been sweeping through the Veros slums, gathering footage for an expose on medical negligence in the outer colonies. It caught fire, smoke, and failure as expected. But then it caught her. Vera crouched beside a collapsed refugee boy, forcing open his airway with improvised tubing from a cracked hydration pouch, her fingers slick with blood, Cinder growling. Beside her, like a demon cub, she wasn't smiling. She was saving someone no one else saw. The drone's footage aired 2 days later across Turanet, expected to gather pity clicks and political condemnation. Instead, it went viral. Unknown street girl saves dying boy, ragged guardian of Varkas. From garbage to grace. Titles were awful, but the footage was undeniable. In 6 seconds, she had become something no one could ignore. The camp erupted. Diplomats arrived. Sponsorships followed. One corp offered her a platinum scholarship to their genetic resequencing program. Another wanted to sponsor her redemption. ARC threw a Hala series. Former Minister of Health offered to personally cover reconstructive surgery and restore her to full dignity. Vera spit on all of them. No one cared when I was bleeding in the alleys, she snarled. Now they want to put me in makeup and call it mercy. Adrian stood behind her as she faced the cameras and offered no apology. I'm not your miracle, she said, staring into the lens like it was prey. I'm proof you failed and I survived you anyway. The room went silent. The broadcast cut, but the message burned into every system before they could erase it. Back at the clinic, she paced furiously, punching the wall hard enough to split her knuckles. They just want to wear me like armor, she hissed. Dress me. Up in their lies so they don't have to change anything. Adrian didn't disagree. He poured disinfectant on her hands, wrapped her fingers, and said, Then don't let them. She looked up at him, jaw clenched, eyes wide. What if I don't know who I am without the anger? He nodded slowly. Then let's find out together. That night, she drew again. Not monsters, not explosions, not herself with knives, but a clinic. In the stars, a place where no one was turned away, where kids in rags sat beside doctors in chrome, where laughter echoed through clean halls, where every broken thing had a place. She gave the picture to Idrin, rolled tightly with string. She didn't say what it was. He didn't ask, but he hung it on the wall beside his oath. And for the first time, he saw her watching it when she thought. No one was looking. The weeks that followed were quietly on the surface. The scars of the mercenary raid still ached in the steel bones of the clinic, and though repairs had been made, walls patched, systems rebooted, medical drones recalibrated, something fundamental had shifted beneath the floor of daily life. Vera no longer drifted at the clinic's edges. She had a place. She just didn't know what to do with it. For someone forged in exile, acceptance was an alien storm. She no longer had to steal food, but she still watched every bite she was offered, as if expecting poison. She walked with Cinder, beside her like a shadow on fire through corridors now filled with whispers of admiration, fear, and sometimes, hesitantly, hope. Children no longer hid when she entered. Some even reached for her hand. Once she flinched. Another time she let a boy draw stars on her wrist with a dull marker and didn't wipe it off for 3 days. Yet, something nagged at her. One morning, she sat in front of a mirror in the surgical prep room, the only reflective surface she had never dared look into before. Adrian found her there with her hands resting motionless on her lap, her eyes staring hollow into the glass as if the creature behind it were a stranger. Her jacket, still patched and dirty, hung off one shoulder. Her face was lined with scars. Old and new, her ears bent where bones had never healed correctly. A crack ran across her left brow ridge, and her lower lip curled in ways the average face would not. She looked wrong, and for the first time she looked afraid of being seen. He said nothing, just waited. Finally, she whispered, "Do you see what they see?" He walked to the mirror, stood beside her, and said, "No, I see what they missed." She turned. Sharply, "Don't say that. Don't make it pretty. I'm not broken. No," he said, sitting beside her. "You're visible, and that scares them more than your face ever will." She didn't answer, but her reflection blinked once, and in the stillness, between breath and silence, a tear fell down the cheeks she never touched. That afternoon she helped a blind elder to his bed, guiding him with voice and calm hands. When he asked what she looked like, she paused, then smiled faintly, like a truth no one wanted to believe. Like a storm that learned to be gentle, she said. The old man laughed for the first time in a week. Later that night, Adrian found a single word etched into the back wall of the supply room. Not spray-painted, not graffitied, just carved into the wall with the tip of a scalpel. Balaam. They came for her under the banner of peace. An envoy from the Galactic Restoration Committee arrived in polished armor, diplomatic robes flowing behind them like false promises. Their ship landed without warning, just outside the clinic walls, its engines singing with the hum of privilege. They asked not for Adrian, not for the director, but for Vera, daughter of the outlawed Zareen caste, the last known remnant of a lost bioengineered subrace once condemned by the Empire itself. "We come to offer asylum," they said. "New name. A new life. In return, you give us your image, your story, your cooperation." Vera stood in front of them in the same tattered jacket, arms crossed, Cinder growling low at her heel. She listened, quiet, unmoving. Then she smiled, a smile sharp as broken glass, and said, "You want to clean me, cage me, and call it healing?" "No," the ambassador said quickly, too quickly. "We want to honor you." Her eyes narrowed. "Then honor me by staying the hell out of my shadow." Adrian watched from the doorway, every muscle tight, ready to intervene. But she didn't need him. She never really had, when they insisted. She pointed to the children playing beneath the broken solar panels, to the elder woman braiding the fourth cords into bracelets for her grandsons, to the clinic halls still lined with makeshift beds and hope, held together with tape and sweat. "This is where I bled," she said. "This is where I learned to stitch. You don't get to take me out of the fire just to parade the ashes." The envoy left within the hour, their smiles brittle, their eyes hollow. They hadn't expected her to say no. They hadn't expected resistance from a girl in rags. They hadn't understood that her defiance was not rebellion. It was a declaration of worth. That evening, the clinic staff hosted a silent memorial for those lost in the raid, lighting hand lanterns across the open courtyard. Vera stood apart at first, arms crossed, watching. Then one of the smaller children, Milo, a boy whose lungs she'd once helped drain during a blackout, ran up and handed her a lantern of his own. "It's for someone who saved you," he whispered. She held it in both hands, unsure what to do. Then Adrian stepped beside her, lit the wick with his old Terran sparkstone, and said softly, "Let it be for the girl who never stopped fighting." She stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, Vera let go of something into the sky. The lantern rose slow and warm, carrying no name, no signature, just light. And in that moment, under a violet sky dusted with stars, a girl once born in filth stood with her chin high and her scars bared not as an outcast or a warning, but as a beacon, It began with silence, and it ended with thunder. 3 weeks after, the envoy departed. The sky above Vero's prime darkened again, but this time not with storms. Warships, not imperial, not Terran, but private militia vessels descended through the stratosphere like the claws of a forgotten god. The syndicates had not forgiven the public humiliation of their defeated mercs. They hadn't forgiven the footage. They hadn't forgiven her. They hadn't come for negotiation. Adrian was in the trauma wing when the warning klaxon screamed. To life. He ran outside to see patients evacuating, staff ushering people underground, and Vera standing on the rooftop, watching the sky as if it owed her a final explanation. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She only reached down and lifted Cinder into her arms as the first cannon. Blast shattered the south-facing towers and turned air into flame. The militia landed hard. Armored troops in black pulse exosuits swept the corridors like wolves through a nursery. Their orders were simple: retrieve or terminate that Zareen asset and destroy all footage of her previous defiance. No witnesses, no evidence, just silence. But Vera had lived too long in silence to die in it now. She met them in the lower halls before they reached the sick bay alone. Just her and her rebar staff and the old jacket Adrian had mended 3 times. She didn't speak. She just moved. One step, then another. They opened fire. The first round hit her shoulder, spun her sideways, but she rolled, dodged the second, closed the distance in less than a breath. Her pole cracked a soldier's faceplate, drove him into the wall, snatched his stun baton, flung it into the second attacker's throat, and screamed not in rage, but in refusal. Adrian arrived with a trauma gun and adrenaline injectors, his coat bloodied from stabilizing a crushed rib cage. He saw her limping, bleeding from the side, still fighting. Not for vengeance, not even for survival, but for those behind her, the patients, the clinic, him. Together, they pushed through. The halls. She guarded the front. He guarded the rear. They moved like a heartbeat, like breath and lungs that refused to quit. Even as more came, even as fire tore across the rooftop and shock grenades rocked the floor, she didn't stop. She took a plasma. Burned to the legs, screamed, dropped to her knees, then got up. Always she got up. The militia fell back after 20 minutes of brutal resistance. Not because they had been fully repelled, but because reinforcements arrived, not from Terran forces, but from civilians, people she had once terrified, people who once called her names, street vendors, miners, refugees, even smugglers from the lower ports. They rose not for the flag, not for glory, for her, because somewhere along the line, the ugly, broken, angry girl had become the soul of something worth defending. The battle ended with 2 ships fleeing in smoke. One crash-landed in the outer dunes, and the other broadcast a panicked emergency code. Target is not asset. Target is wildfire. Later, as Adrian cleaned her wounds in the still smoldering medbay, she chuckled through the pain. Guess I'm not such a mistake anymore. He touched her forehead, gently, a rare moment of reverence. Didn't deserve. And that night, no one called her anything at all. They just whispered with awe. She stayed. Months passed and Vera remained, not as an icon, not as a myth, but as herself. The clinic became a sanctuary, not because of policy, not because of funding, but because she guarded its doors like a lioness and swept its halls like a daughter of fire. She trained with the medics, not to become one, but to understand what it meant to keep someone breathing. She still limped. Her scars deepened, but she walked tall. One afternoon, a group of xenobiologists arrived from an off-world university, claiming to want to study rare survivors of failed castes. They offered her coin. They offered her transformation. They offered her beauty. She took the folder they handed her, read their evaluations, then lit it on fire with a spark stone and walked away. She no longer needed to scream to be heard. Children now ran to her when they were scared, knowing she would lift them with arms stronger than steel and hearts softer than they'd ever imagined. Cinder, now fully recovered and grown, patrolled the rooftops and napped beside the solar vents, his tail flicking like a century's flag. Refugees etched her likeness into mural walls not glamorized, not polished, but fierce and real and armored in defiance. Adrian once asked her if she ever thought of leaving, of starting over somewhere cleaner, somewhere gentler. She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. I already did right here. That evening, she hosted her first lesson for street kids titled, Not Self-Defense, but How to Never Bow. The room was packed. Half of them didn't even have shoes. She taught them how to look back when people stared, how to move fast in tight spaces, how to spit in a fierce face without blinking. Then she said quietly, the ugliest thing they told me was that I didn't deserve to be seen. So I became something they couldn't ignore. Adrian watched from the back, arms folded, pride swelling where sorrow used to live. She had no medals, no citizenship, no makeup to cover the burns. But in that moment, Vera became more than what they abandoned. She became what they needed, and she never once had to be beautiful to do it.